My father kicked me out of our shared dream home, declaring his new family was moving on without me. So, I locked the family trust and canceled the escrow, trapping them in a multi-million-dollar disaster they never saw coming. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The persistent, shrill ringing of my cell phone sliced through the heavy, feverish fog filling my bedroom. I groaned, burying my face deeper into my sweat-dampened pillow. For the past 3 days, a severe bout of the flu had kept me completely bedridden. My chest felt tight, my throat was raw, and my entire body ached with a relentless, deep-bone exhaustion. As a wealth management advisor and licensed real estate broker, my days were usually a whirlwind of high-stakes meetings and property viewings, but right now, just reaching for the phone on my nightstand felt like an insurmountable challenge. I forced one eye open, the harsh blue light of the screen blinding me for a second. It was Henry, my father. I cleared my throat, trying to sound more alert than I felt, and swiped to answer. "Dad, hey, sorry I'm still fighting off this terrible bug. What's going on? Is everything okay with the Oakwood estate paperwork?" We were only 48 hours away from closing on the Oakwood estate, a massive, sprawling generational property that we had agreed to purchase together. It was supposed to be our fresh start, a shared compound where he could enjoy his retirement and I could have a permanent, stable home base. There was a long, unnatural pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of someone whispering in the background. It sounded distinctly like Sandra, my stepmother. "Sophia," my father finally said. His voice didn't have its usual warmth. It was flat, clipped, and incredibly distant. "I'm calling to inform you of a change in plans regarding the house." A change in plans. I croaked, sitting up slightly, the room spinning around me. "Dad, the closing is on Thursday. The escrow is fully funded, the inspections are done. We can't change the plans now. What are you talking about?" "Listen to me carefully," he continued, his tone devoid of any parental affection. It was as if he were reading from a corporate script. "Sandra and I have been discussing the layout of the property. The east wing, the one you had designated for yourself, is much better suited for Owen's new business venture. He needs the studio space for his lifestyle brand." My brain, sluggish from the fever, struggled to process his words. Owen, Sandra's 26-year-old son, who had never held a steady job in his life, was suddenly taking my wing of the house. The wing I had designed, the wing I was paying for. "Dad, that's impossible," I said, my voice rising in panic. "I am moving into the east wing. I've already ended the lease on my apartment. All my furniture is in storage, ready for the move. We agreed on this." "We are moving on without you, Sophia," Henry said coldly, his words hitting me like a physical blow. "Sandra pointed out that you're an independent woman, you have your own career, you don't need to be living with us. You're not immediate family in the same way Owen is right now. He needs our support. Don't come back to the property. Don't try to move in. We are finalizing this as a family, just the 3 of us." "Just the 3 of you?" I gasped, the air completely leaving my lungs. "Dad, my money is anchoring that deal. I'm the one who negotiated the terms. You can't just cut me out." "The family trust is locked in, Sophia. The money is there, and the deal is moving forward. Sandra consulted someone, and she assured me the trust cannot be touched now that it's in escrow. Goodbye, Sophia. Do not call us back today. We are very busy packing." The line went dead. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the darkened screen as a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. My own father had just discarded me like an unwanted piece of furniture, easily manipulated into stealing my dream just to appease his new wife and her entitled son. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs, a sickening mixture of grief and pure shock washing over me. As I collapsed back against my pillows, shivering violently, I realized the betrayal was worse than the fever burning in my chest. The immediate aftermath of that phone call was a blur of physical agony and emotional devastation. I lay staring at the ceiling of my apartment for what felt like hours, tears streaming hot and fast down my face, mixing with the sweat of my fever. My mind raced, replaying Henry's cold, detached words on an endless loop. "We are moving on without you. You're not immediate family." Nausea rolled through me in violent waves. I dragged myself out of bed, my legs trembling so violently I had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. I couldn't just accept this over the phone. I needed to look my father in the eyes. I needed to see if he truly understood the magnitude of what he had just done to his only daughter. I pulled a heavy wool coat over my pajamas, shoved my feet into a pair of boots, and grabbed my car keys. Outside, a miserable, freezing rain was falling, matching the bleakness inside my chest. The drive to Henry and Sandra's current townhouse was only 20 minutes, but navigating the slick roads through my feverish haze made it feel like an eternity. My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel, my breath rattling in my lungs. When I finally pulled into their driveway, I saw Owen's flashy, entirely impractical sports car parked haphazardly near the front door. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I walked through the freezing rain and pounded heavily on their front door. Moments later, the door swung open. It wasn't my father. It was Sandra. She stood in the doorway wearing an immaculate cashmere lounge set, holding a delicate china teacup. She looked me up and down, taking in my pale, sweat-streaked face, my damp hair, and my trembling frame. A slow, sickeningly smug smile spread across her meticulously made-up face. "Oh, Sophia," Sandra sighed, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Look at you. You really shouldn't have come out in this state. You look absolutely dreadful." "I need to speak to my father, Sandra. Right now," I demanded, my voice raspy and weak, but fueled by desperation. "Henry is very busy, sweetie," she purred, taking a slow sip of her tea. "We are finalizing the moving logistics for the new estate. Owen is terribly excited about his new studio space. It's going to be so wonderful for his brand." "Let me speak to my dad," I repeated, trying to step past her, but she planted her foot in the doorway, blocking my path. "Who is it, Sandra?" Henry's voice called out from the hallway. A second later, he appeared behind her. He was wearing his favorite reading glasses, holding a stack of moving box labels. "Dad," I pleaded, reaching my hand out toward him. "Please, talk to me. You can't do this. I've given up my apartment. I've poured my life savings into making this estate happen for us. You can't just throw me out on the street to give my space to Owen." Henry wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the floorboards just past my boots. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly cowardly, refusing to meet the gaze of the daughter he had just betrayed. "I told you on the phone, Sophia," Henry muttered softly, his voice wavering slightly before Sandra placed a firm, controlling hand on his arm. His posture immediately stiffened. "The decision is final. You are an adult. You will figure it out. The trust money is already in the escrow account, so the house is secured for us. We don't need anything else from you. Now, please leave. You are upsetting Sandra." I stood there in the freezing rain, absolutely stunned. Upsetting Sandra. I was the one standing in the cold, sick, betrayed, and effectively rendered homeless by my own flesh and blood. "You're making a massive mistake, Dad," I whispered, the fight suddenly draining out of my sick body. "Goodbye, Sophia," Sandra said brightly, and slammed the heavy oak door squarely in my face. I heard the deadbolt click into place. I stood on the porch for a long time, the icy rain soaking through my coat, chilling me to the bone. They truly believed they had won. They truly believed they had successfully stolen my money and my home, locking me out of my own future. As I turned and slowly walked back to my car, wiping the freezing rain from my cheeks, a sudden, sharp clarity pierced through the fog of my fever. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought the money was untouchable. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. Sitting in my cold car, the engine idling as the heater struggled to warm my trembling hands, I let the memories of the past few years wash over me. The betrayal hurt so profoundly because of everything I had sacrificed to keep my father afloat. 5 years ago, after my mother passed away, Henry had completely fallen apart. He had been a successful architect, but grief swallowed him whole. He stopped working, ignored his bills, and nearly lost his home to foreclosure. I was the one who stepped in. I spent countless hours auditing his chaotic finances, paying off his mounting debts from my own savings, and carefully restructuring his retirement portfolio so he wouldn't end up destitute. I was the one who cooked his meals, organized his house, and slowly pulled him back from the brink. We had been a team. I had been his rock. Then, 2 years ago, Sandra entered the picture. They met at a local country club event that Henry had only attended because I forced him to get out of the house. Sandra immediately latched onto him. From the very beginning, something about her set off blaring alarm bells in my mind. She presented herself as a high-end, lifestyle consultant, a vague profession that seemed to yield zero actual income, but required her to maintain a facade of extreme wealth. She dressed exclusively in designer labels, drove a leased luxury car she could barely afford, and constantly name-dropped prominent socialites who clearly didn't actually know her. She was a parasite wrapped in silk, and Henry, lonely and vulnerable, was the perfect host. Sandra's manipulation was subtle at first. She would make offhand comments about how tiring it must be for me to manage Henry's accounts, suggesting he needed his independence back. Slowly, she isolated him. Sunday dinners with me were suddenly canceled because Sandra had planned a romantic getaway. My phone calls went unanswered because they were doing a digital detox. But her true colors always flared whenever money was involved. I remembered a dinner we had 6 months ago when we first began discussing purchasing a joint property. Henry and I had initially looked at modest, comfortable duplexes, but Sandra had inserted herself forcefully into the conversation. "Henry, darling, you deserve an estate," she had cooed, refilling his wine glass. "Something sprawling, a place where we can host galas, where Owen can build his brand. A duplex is so pedestrian." She had turned her sharp, calculating eyes on me. "Sophia, with your background in wealth management, surely you can structure something grander. Henry tells me you have quite the impressive investment portfolio yourself. Families should pool their resources, don't you agree?" It was blatantly inappropriate. She was entirely unemployed, bringing absolutely zero assets to the table, yet she was aggressively dictating how my money and my father's remaining retirement funds should be spent. Over the next few months, she relentlessly pushed for the Oakwood estate, a multi-million-dollar property that was wildly out of Henry's individual price range. To make the dream work for my father, I had agreed to anchor the deal. Because Henry's funds were tied up in liquid assets that would take months to clear, I used my own liquid capital to fund the massive down payment and secure the escrow. Sandra had asked me dozens of questions about the family trust I had established for the purchase. "So, once the money is in the trust, it belongs to the estate, right? It's locked in for the family?" she had asked, her eyes gleaming with undisguised greed. I had given her vague, non-committal answers, never fully explaining the legal mechanics of the documents I had drafted. Now, sitting in the freezing rain outside the house I was just banished from, her questions made perfect sense. She had spent months grooming Henry, convincing him that I was an unnecessary appendage, all while ensuring my money was firmly planted in the escrow account. She thought she had legally trapped my funds to purchase her son a luxury studio and herself a mansion, entirely at my expense. She had severely underestimated the woman she was trying to steal from. The freezing rain continued to batter the windows of my apartment for the rest of the evening, but the shivering weakness of my flu was rapidly being replaced by a completely different kind of heat. It was a cold, quiet, and calculating fury. I had spent the last 2 years bending over backward, sacrificing my own peace of mind, my time, and my financial liquidity to ensure my father had a comfortable, secure retirement. And in exactly 3 minutes on a phone call, he had discarded me to appease a woman who had never worked a day in her life. I sat at my kitchen table, wrapped in a heavy blanket, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. My hands were finally steady. The tears had completely stopped. Sandra and Henry truly believed they had outmaneuvered me. They believed the narrative Sandra had spun. That because the down payment was sitting in an escrow account attached to the Oakwood estate purchase agreement, the money was untouchable. They thought the trust was a locked vault and they held the only key. But as a wealth management advisor, I build vaults for a living. And I never, ever hand over the master key. I opened my secure client portal and navigated to the internal documents for the Vance Family Trust. When I had originally drafted the framework with my legal team, Sandra had constantly hovered, asking prying questions. To keep the peace, I had allowed her to believe it was an irrevocable trust, permanently binding the funds to the property and the family. It was not. It was a highly specific, perfectly legal revocable trust, and more importantly, I was the sole grantor and the sole trustee. My father was listed as a secondary beneficiary, but his access to any funds or assets was entirely contingent upon my explicit, written approval. Sandra and Owen weren't even named in the document. My fingers flew across the keyboard. First, I accessed the trust's primary holding account. With 3 clicks and a secure 2-factor authentication code, I officially revoked the trust's authorization to purchase the Oakwood estate. Next, I logged into the escrow portal. I submitted the emergency cancellation forms, citing a fundamental breach of the co-purchaser agreement. Because I was the sole depositor of the multi-million-dollar down payment, and because the closing was still 48 hours away, I had the unilateral right to pull my capital. I watched the screen load. A small green checkmark appeared. Transfer initiated. Escrow canceled. Funds withdrawing to originating account. I let out a long, shaky breath. The money was safe. But my father and Sandra were still legally bound to the purchase contract they had signed with the sellers, a contract that now had absolutely zero financial backing. When Thursday morning arrived, they would be on the hook for a multi-million-dollar property with no way to pay for it, exposing them to catastrophic breach of contract penalties. But simply securing my money wasn't enough. Sandra had tried to ruin my life and steal my future. I needed to know exactly who had infiltrated my family. I opened a new browser window and logged into my professional real estate and background investigation databases, tools I use daily to vet high-net-worth clients and commercial tenants. I typed in Sandra's full legal name, her date of birth, and her previous addresses. I expected to find some minor credit card debt or perhaps a history of living beyond her means. What the database returned was a masterclass in professional parasitism. Sandra's lifestyle consulting firm was completely fabricated. There was no registered LLC, no corporate tax history, and no business license in our state or any neighboring state. Instead, I found a trail of absolute financial devastation. There were 3 separate civil judgments against her for unpaid luxury apartment leases over the last decade. Her credit score was practically non-existent, decimated by a string of maxed-out, defaulted credit cards. But the most damning piece of evidence was a buried bankruptcy filing from 6 years ago, filed jointly with her second husband. Reading through the public court documents, a sickening pattern emerged. Sandra had convinced her previous husband to leverage his own retirement accounts to fund a business venture for her son, Owen. The venture never existed. The money disappeared into Sandra's designer wardrobe and leased cars, leaving the husband bankrupt and completely destitute. She was running the exact same playbook on my father. And she was using the Oakwood estate as the final, fatal trap. The next morning, the fever had almost entirely broken, leaving behind a sharp, crystalline focus. I was sitting at my desk, organizing the massive stack of printed public records detailing Sandra's fraudulent history, when the heavy buzzer to my apartment complex echoed through the hallway. I checked the security monitor. Standing in the lobby, looking incredibly irritated and impatient, were Sandra and Owen. Sandra was wearing a pristine white trench coat, tapping her designer heel against the tile, while Owen slouched next to her, chewing loudly on a piece of gum. They had come to gloat, I realized. Or more likely, they had realized they needed one final piece of paperwork from me. I pressed the button to unlock the lobby doors and waited, my heart beating in a slow, steady rhythm. A few moments later, a sharp, demanding knock rapped against my door. I opened it to find Sandra wearing a smile so fake it looked physically painful. "Sophia, darling," Sandra chimed, stepping into my apartment without waiting for an invitation. Owen trailed behind her, barely looking at me. "I see you're finally out of bed. That's wonderful. We don't have much time. We have a very busy day of meeting with the interior decorators for the new house." "What do you want, Sandra?" I asked, closing the door and leaning against it, crossing my arms over my chest. Sandra sighed dramatically, reaching into her oversized leather handbag and pulling out a thick manila envelope. "Well, Henry and I were speaking with the title company this morning. It seems there's a tiny, insignificant clerical hurdle. Because you initially helped set up the escrow, the title agents are requesting a simple release of interest form from you. It just officially removes your name from the final deeds so Henry, Owen, and I can be listed as the sole proprietors of the estate. It's just a formality, really." She thrust a pen and a printed document toward me. "If you could just sign right here, on the dotted line, we will be out of your hair forever. You can go back to whatever it is you do here." I didn't take the pen. I didn't even look at the document. I looked directly into Sandra's heavily mascaraed eyes. "A formality," I repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the quiet apartment. "Just like the lifestyle consulting business you run. Is that a formality too?" Sandra's fake smile faltered by a fraction of an inch. "I beg your pardon." "I'm just curious," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Because I was trying to find your business registration yesterday to see if perhaps your firm could assist with my own moving logistics, but I couldn't find an LLC. In fact, I couldn't find a single record of you ever earning a legitimate income, but I did find something else." I pushed off the door and walked over to my desk, picking up the top sheet of the dossier I had compiled. I held it up so the bold, black text of the court heading was clearly visible. "I found a civil judgment from 2018, I read aloud, enunciating every syllable. "A judgment against you for $45,000 in unpaid rent on a penthouse in the city. A penthouse you were evicted from, Sandra. And right beneath that, I found the bankruptcy filing you forced your second husband into after draining his 401k to fund Owen's business ventures." The color instantly drained from Sandra's face, leaving her foundation looking like a chalky mask. Owen stopped chewing his gum, his posture suddenly rigid. "You little snooping brat," Sandra hissed, her polished facade shattering completely. Her voice lost its melodic purr, dropping into a harsh, grating sneer. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Those are private matters. You are invading my privacy." "Public records aren't private, Sandra," I replied, taking a step toward her. "You are a serial grifter. You isolate older men, you drain their assets, and then you leave them with nothing. You thought you could do it to my father, and you thought you could use my money to buy the house you plan to ruin him in. My mother is a respected consultant." Owen suddenly shouted, stepping forward aggressively, his face flushing red. "You're just jealous because Henry likes us more than he likes you. Sign the paper, Sophia. Stop being a bitter loser." "I will not sign anything," I said, my voice turning to ice. "And if either of you ever step foot in my home again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Get out." Sandra snatched the document back, her hands visibly shaking with a mixture of rage and panic. "You think you're so smart," she spat, backing toward the door. "You think you can ruin this for us. The money is in the escrow account, Sophia. The house is ours. Henry will never believe your pathetic lies. You are completely powerless." "We'll see about that," I whispered as she dragged Owen out into the hallway, slamming the door behind them so hard the picture frames on my walls rattled. The fallout from the apartment confrontation was instantaneous. Less than 2 hours after I kicked Sandra and Owen out, my phone began to ring. It was Henry. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 minutes later, he called again. Then again. He was relentless. Finally, on the 4th attempt, I answered. "Hello, Dad." "What is wrong with you, Sophia?" Henry bellowed into the phone, his voice shaking with a terrifying intensity I had never heard from him before. "Sandra just came home in tears. She said you threatened her, that you waved fabricated documents in her face and that you refused to sign the release forms. They aren't fabricated, Dad, I said, trying to keep my own emotions in check as my heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled her public records. She has a history of bankrupting her partners. She has massive civil judgments against her. She's a fraud, Dad. She is using you. Stop it, he screamed, the sound tearing at my chest. Just stop it. I know about her past. She told me everything. She had a terrible, abusive ex-husband who ruined her credit and tried to destroy her business. She has been completely transparent with me from day one. You are so resentful, Sophia. You cannot stand to see me happy with a new family, so you are trying to poison the well. I closed my eyes, a single tear slipping down my cheek. Sandra was better at this than I thought. She had preempted my discoveries, feeding him a sob story that twisted her financial crimes into a narrative of victimhood, solidifying his protective instincts over her. Dad, please listen to me. No, you listen to me, Henry interrupted, his tone turning remarkably cold and authoritative. The closing is tomorrow at noon at the lawyer's office. The seller's agents will be there. You will come to the office. You will sign the release of interest form and you will apologize to Sandra. If you refuse, I will have my own lawyers sue you for obstruction of a real estate transaction. You will not ruin my future, Sophia. Do you understand me? He hung up before I could respond. I sat in the silence of my apartment, feeling the crushing weight of his blind loyalty to a woman who was actively destroying him. He was completely under her spell. He was willing to threaten his own daughter with legal action to protect the parasite feeding on him. The grief was heavy, but the anger was stronger. I realized that arguing with him over the phone would never work. Sandra would always be there, whispering poison into his other ear. I needed undeniable, catastrophic proof of her current, active deception, not just her past. I needed to prove she was robbing him right now. I went back to my computer. If Sandra was following her usual pattern, she wouldn't just be satisfied with a free house. She would be actively trying to extract liquid cash. I began to comb through the title company's preliminary filings and the public county clerk's pending document portal. I searched for Henry's name, the Oakwood estate address, and anything associated with Owen. After 3 agonizing hours of digging through municipal databases, I found it. It was a pending UCC financing statement, a public notice that a lender has a claim against an asset. My blood ran completely cold as I read the details. Sandra had recently taken out a private, high-interest personal loan for $150,000. The listed business purpose was for Owen's lifestyle brand. But the collateral listed for this massive, predatory loan wasn't Sandra's assets because she had none. The collateral listed was the projected equity of the Oakwood estate, heavily backed by a secondary guarantor, Henry Vance. I stared at the digital signature on the document. It was Henry's name, but the strokes were entirely wrong. The H was looped differently. The Y didn't tail off the way my father's always did. It was a blatant, sloppy forgery. Sandra had forged my father's signature to take out a massive debt against a house they didn't even own yet, intending to saddle him with the payments the moment the deed was finalized. She wasn't just manipulating him, she was actively committing felony financial fraud. I printed the UCC filing, the forged signature page, and the accompanying loan origination documents. I placed them into a sleek, black leather binder, right next to the confirmation of my canceled escrow transfer. My father wanted me at the lawyer's office tomorrow at noon. He wanted a signature. He wanted me to witness his triumph. I gently closed the black binder, a grim, humorless smile touching my lips. I would be there, and I was going to burn Sandra's entire world to the ground. The law offices of Sterling, Pratt, and Hughes occupied the entire top floor of a sleek, glass-paneled high-rise in the center of the financial district. Stepping off the elevator at 1:45, the air immediately felt different, heavier, chilled by aggressive air conditioning, and scented with expensive leather and freshly brewed artisan coffee. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished marble floor as I made my way to the receptionist's desk. I was carrying nothing but my purse and the sleek, black leather binder tucked securely under my left arm. My heart was pounding a frantic, erratic rhythm against my ribs, but outwardly, I projected the calm, impenetrable facade I had cultivated over a decade of high-stakes wealth management negotiations. "Sophia Miller," I told the receptionist, my voice steady and completely devoid of the emotional turmoil churning in my stomach. "I am here for the Oakwood estate closing with Henry Miller." "Yes, Ms. Miller. They are expecting you in conference room B," the receptionist murmured with a polite, practiced smile, gesturing down a long, dimly lit corridor lined with abstract art. As I walked down the hallway, every step felt like a drumbeat leading to an execution. I reached the heavy, frosted glass doors of conference room B, took one final, deep, stabilizing breath, and pushed the handle. The room was expansive, dominated by a massive, polished mahogany table. Sitting on the far side were the seller's representatives, an older, distinguished couple looking eager to finalize their lucrative sale, flanked by their real estate agent and a junior attorney shuffling through stacks of legal parchment. But my eyes immediately locked onto the opposite side of the table. Henry sat near the head, wearing his best tailored suit, though he looked visibly tense, his fingers drumming a nervous, erratic beat against the wood. To his immediate right sat Sandra. She looked absolutely triumphant. She was draped in a tailored, pale pink Chanel suit, her hair perfectly blown out, a massive, ostentatious diamond ring, undoubtedly purchased on credit, sparkling on her finger as she delicately tapped her phone screen. Owen slouched in the chair next to her, wearing designer streetwear that probably cost more than my first car, looking entirely bored by the entire proceeding. The moment the heavy glass door clicked shut behind me, the dynamic in the room shifted. Henry looked up, his jaw tightening instantly. Sandra's eyes snapped toward me, and that familiar, sickly sweet, entirely artificial smile stretched across her meticulously painted lips. "Oh, Sophia, darling." "You made it," Sandra cooed, her voice echoing loudly in the cavernous room. She made a theatrical show of checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "And just in time. We were beginning to worry you were going to be difficult and hold up these lovely people." She gestured grandly toward the sellers, who offered me polite, confused smiles. I didn't acknowledge Sandra. I didn't acknowledge Owen. I kept my gaze fixed entirely on my father as I pulled out the chair directly across from him and sat down, placing the black binder squarely on the table in front of me. "I'm here, Dad," I said quietly. The closing attorney, a man with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses named Mr. Abernathy, cleared his throat, sensing the palpable, suffocating tension radiating from our side of the table. "Well, now that all primary parties are present, we can proceed. We have a rather substantial amount of paperwork to finalize for the transfer of the Oakwood estate deed. Mr. Miller, if we could begin with your side. There is a secondary release of interest form that requires MS. Sophia Miller's signature before we can authorize the title transfer, given her initial position on the escrow deposit." Mr. Abernathy slid a single piece of paper across the polished mahogany. It came to rest inches from my black binder. "It's just a standard formality," Sandra chimed in quickly, her voice a pitch too high, desperate to control the narrative in front of the sellers. "Just sign it, Sophia, so we can all move forward with our new lives." I looked at the piece of paper, then slowly dragged my eyes back to my father. He was staring at me intensely, silently commanding me to comply, completely oblivious to the financial slaughterhouse he was walking into. "I'm not signing this, Mr. Abernathy," I stated, my voice ringing out clear and authoritative in the silent room. "Because there is no closing happening today." A collective gasp echoed from the seller's side of the table. The older couple exchanged panicked glances. Mr. Abernathy frowned, leaning forward over his stacked folders. "I'm sorry, Ms. Miller, I don't understand. The contracts are signed. We are simply executing the final financial transfers and deed recordings." "Sophia, stop this immediately," Henry hissed, slamming his open palm against the table. His face flushed a deep, angry crimson. "Do not embarrass me in front of these people. I told you on the phone, I will not tolerate this petty jealousy. Sign the damn paper." Are you insane? Sandra shrieked, her carefully constructed upper-class facade cracking instantly. She pointed a trembling finger at me, turning to the lawyer. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's having a mental breakdown. Ignore her. The money is in the escrow account. Henry and I are the primary buyers. About that escrow account, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. I unzipped the black leather binder and flipped it open. I pulled out the first document, the official, time-stamped confirmation from the title company's secure banking portal. I slid the document across the table directly to Mr. Abernathy. Mr. Abernathy, as the sole depositor and the sole legal trustee of the Vance Family Trust, which was the originating entity for the down payment, I executed a unilateral cancellation of the escrow transfer yesterday afternoon. I explained, maintaining aggressive, unwavering eye contact with the lawyer. The funds have been fully withdrawn. There is zero capital in that account. The balance is zero. The room descended into a silence so profound, so absolute, it felt as though all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out through the ventilation vents. Mr. Abernathy adjusted his glasses, picking up the paper. His eyes scanned the document rapidly. He blanched, his professional composure shattering. He looked up at the sellers, then at my father, sheer panic in his eyes. Mr. Miller, she is correct. The escrow account has been drained. The wire was reversed yesterday. There are no funds to close this transaction. What? Henry roared, shooting up from his chair. He looked wildly from the lawyer to me, his chest heaving. That's impossible. Sandra, you spoke to the consultant. You told me the trust was locked. You told me she couldn't touch the money once it was deposited. Sandra was hyperventilating. Her face had lost all its color, making her heavy blush look like clown paint. She gripped the edge of the mahogany table so hard her knuckles were bone white. She's lying. She forged that. She's a hacker, Henry. She's trying to ruin us. Sue her. Sue her right now. Owen had completely shrunk into his chair, the arrogant slouch replaced by genuine, terrified rigidity. I didn't hack anything, Sandra, I replied, my voice slicing through her hysterical screaming like a freshly sharpened scalpel. The trust was revocable. I am the sole trustee. I hold all the keys. You thought you could manipulate my father into kicking me out, steal my down payment, and move your deadbeat son into a mansion funded by my decade of hard work. But you are nothing but a common, financially illiterate parasite. You little, Sandra lunged forward, but Henry threw his arm out, stopping her. My father was shaking violently. He looked down at me, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization dawning in them, but he was still clinging desperately to the illusion. Sophia, he stammered, his voice breaking. Why would you do this? Why would you leave us on the hook for a multi-million-dollar contract? We will be sued. You're destroying me just to spite her. I'm not destroying you, Dad, I said softly, the anger finally giving way to a profound, hollow sadness. I reached into the black binder for the final time. I pulled out the printed UCC filing and the loan origination documents. She is. I slid the thick stack of papers across the table. They landed directly in front of Henry. I pulled the public municipal records last night, Dad, I explained, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. While you were busy packing boxes and telling me I wasn't your immediate family anymore, your new wife was busy leveraging the house you didn't even own yet. She took out a private, high-interest personal loan for $150,000. The money was wired to an offshore LLC registered to Owen. Henry stared down at the documents as if they were venomous snakes. He didn't touch them. Read the second page, Dad, I instructed, my voice unwavering. Look at the guarantor signature. Henry slowly, with trembling fingers, turned the page. He stared at the signature line. He stared at it for what felt like an eternity. The silence in the room was excruciating. The sellers were watching in horrified fascination. Their agent looked sick. I didn't sign this, Henry whispered, the words barely audible. He looked up, his eyes entirely hollow, stripped of all their former defiance. He turned slowly to look at Sandra. I didn't sign this. The H is wrong. You forged my name. Sandra stepped back, her Chanel suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. She threw her hands up, stepping away from him as if he were on fire. "Henry, darling, please, listen to me." It was just a bridge loan. Owen needed the capital for inventory. I was going to pay it back the moment the house closed and we had equity. I was doing it for our family, for our future. "You forged my signature to take on $150,000 of debt," Henry repeated, his voice gaining strength, shifting from shock to pure, unadulterated rage. "You used my name, you used my credit, you lied to me about the trust, you lied to me about everything." "She made me do it," Sandra screamed, suddenly pointing a frantic, desperate finger at me. "Sophia made me do it. She was so controlling with your money, I had to secure our future. Henry, you love me, we are moving on without her, remember?" Henry looked at the woman he had abandoned me for. He looked at the fake designer clothes, the fake tears, the undeniable, irrefutable proof of her financial treason resting on the table. Then he looked at me. For the first time in 2 years, the fog of manipulation was completely gone from his eyes. He saw exactly what he had done. He saw exactly who he had chosen. "We are not moving anywhere, Sandra," Henry said, his voice dropping into a register of terrifying, absolute finality. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He spoke with the cold, dead tone of a man who had just watched his entire life burn down. "The wedding is off. The relationship is over. If you and your son are not out of my townhouse by the time I get back, I will have the police physically remove you." Sandra let out a guttural, animalistic sob. She tried to grab his arm, but he violently shoved her away. "Get out," he roared, the sound echoing off the glass walls. "Get out of my sight before I have you arrested for forgery right here in this room." Sandra scrambled backward, tripping over the leg of a chair. She grabbed her oversized designer bag, tears streaking her heavy makeup, and bolted for the door, Owen scurrying frantically behind her like a frightened rat. The heavy glass door swung shut, leaving behind nothing but the scent of her overpowering perfume and the absolute wreckage of my father's life. The immediate aftermath in Conference Room B was a masterclass in professional damage control. With Sandra and Owen gone, the sheer gravity of the situation settled over the table. The sellers were furious, their agent was furiously texting, and Mr. Abernathy looked as though he was on the verge of a stress-induced coronary. My father sat completely paralyzed in his chair, staring blankly at the forged documents, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He was legally bound to a multi-million-dollar purchase contract. He had zero liquid capital, and he had just discovered his fiancée was a criminal who had saddled him with a massive, fraudulent loan. He was facing total financial ruin, but I was a wealth management advisor. I spent my life fixing financial disasters, and despite the profound betrayal, despite the agonizing words he had spoken to me on the phone just days prior, he was still my father. I could not let him be destroyed. I stood up, walked around the table, and gently placed my hand on his trembling shoulder. He flinched, but I squeezed firmly, grounding him. I looked directly at the seller's agent. "Gentlemen," I began, my tone entirely professional, slipping effortlessly into my role as a licensed real estate broker. "I sincerely apologize for the dramatic nature of this morning's events. However, my client, Mr. Miller, has been the victim of severe, documented financial fraud, which fundamentally alters his ability to execute this contract. I understand your clients are entitled to retain the earnest money deposit due to the breach, and we will not contest that. Furthermore, I have 2 highly qualified, pre-approved buyers in my personal portfolio who have been actively looking for an estate exactly like Oakwood. I am prepared to bring you a full price, cash offer by close of business tomorrow to ensure your sellers are not inconvenienced by this delay." The tension in the room instantly deflated. The sellers looked visibly relieved. Their agent nodded slowly, recognizing a clean exit strategy when he saw one. Within 30 minutes, we had negotiated a mutual release from the contract. Henry would lose a small earnest money deposit, but he was saved from a catastrophic multi-million-dollar lawsuit. The drive back to my father's townhouse was completely silent. The freezing rain from the previous days had finally cleared, leaving behind a cold, crisp, blindingly bright afternoon. When we pulled into the driveway, Owen's flashy sports car was gone. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the townhouse was a chaotic mess. Closets had been ransacked, drawers were left open, and expensive electronics were missing. Sandra and Owen had fled, taking whatever they could carry in their panicked retreat. Henry walked slowly into the center of the living room, looking at the empty spaces where Sandra's fake designer luggage used to sit. He looked older than I had ever seen him. He looked entirely broken. He slowly sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. A harsh, agonizing sob tore from his throat. "Sophia," he wept, his voice muffled by his hands, his shoulders shaking with the force of his grief and intense shame. "My God, Sophia, what have I done? What did I say to you?" I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed against the chill in the air. The anger that had fueled me for the past 48 hours had entirely burned out, leaving behind a profound, hollow exhaustion. "You told me I wasn't your family anymore," I said quietly, the words still tasting like ash in my mouth. "You told me you were moving on without me, to give my space to a man who never worked a day in his life. You threw me away, Dad." Henry dropped his hands, looking up at me with eyes red and swollen with tears. "I was so blind," he choked out. "She whispered in my ear constantly. She told me you were trying to control me, that you were keeping me from living my life. She isolated me so perfectly, and I was so weak, so terrified of being alone again, that I let her. I let her turn me against my own daughter. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make this right." I walked slowly into the room and sat on the edge of the coffee table, facing him. "You can't fix this with an apology, Dad," I told him, my voice steady but gentle. "You broke something fundamental between us. You chose the illusion she sold you over the reality of everything I have ever done for you. That level of trust doesn't just come back because you realize you were conned." "I know," he whispered, staring at the floorboards. "I know. But," I continued, taking a deep breath, "I also know what grief does to people. I know how vulnerable you were. I am not going to abandon you to clean up this legal mess alone." Over the next 3 months, our lives were consumed by lawyers and police reports. Because I had secured the UCC documents, we were able to file a comprehensive police report regarding the forgery and the fraudulent loan. Given her extensive history of civil judgments and bankruptcy fraud, the district attorney took a keen interest in Sandra's case. 6 weeks after the disastrous meeting in Conference Room B, Sandra was officially indicted on 2 counts of felony financial fraud and 1 count of identity theft. Owen, desperate to save himself, immediately turned state's evidence against his mother, confirming she had orchestrated the entire scheme to fund his lifestyle. Sandra's carefully constructed world of fake wealth completely collapsed, ending in a sterile county jail cell where no amount of designer perfume could mask the reality of her actions. Henry spent months working closely with his attorneys to clear the fraudulent loan from his credit report. He sold the townhouse, opting instead to downsize into a modest, comfortable single-story home closer to the city. He started attending therapy twice a week, slowly unraveling the deep-seated fears of abandonment that Sandra had so ruthlessly exploited. As for me, I didn't return to the apartment I had nearly vacated. With the escrow funds safely returned to my accounts, I purchased a stunning, modern penthouse overlooking the river. It was bright, it was secure, and it was entirely mine. Our relationship was forever changed. We no longer shared bank accounts, and I firmly stepped down from managing any aspect of his daily finances, enforcing strict, healthy boundaries. We had dinners on Sunday evenings, slowly rebuilding the foundation of our relationship, brick by painful brick. The blind, unquestioning loyalty was gone, replaced by a cautious, mature understanding of each other's flaws. Standing on the balcony of my new penthouse, looking out over the glittering city lights, I took a deep breath of the crisp night air. I had survived the ultimate betrayal from the person I trusted most. I had faced down a predator who tried to steal my future, and I had systematically dismantled her entire life. I had lost the Oakwood estate, and I had lost the naive version of my father. But as I stood alone in the quiet luxury of a home I had bought and protected myself, I realized I had gained something far more valuable. I had gained an unbreakable, absolute certainty in my own strength. And no one would ever be able to take that away from me again.